The fire had burned only the front of her body. Her arms were raised in that strange position, the boxer's pose, that bodies take when they've been consumed by flame. Her face was gone, her hair was gone, but the back of her body was untouched, as if she had thrown herself backward, away from the heat, as if she had been alive while she burned. Beside her, arranged carefully on the rocks, lay her watch, her jewelry, 2 earrings and a ring, not worn, placed. And on every item near her body, every bottle, every piece of clothing, the labels had been cut away. The manufacturer's marks scraped off. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure this woman could never be identified. That was November 29th, 1970, in a remote valley outside Bergen, Norway. More than 50 years later, we still don't know her name. You're listening to Dusk Cases. I'll be your voice tonight as we walk through one of the most haunting cold cases in European history, the story of the Isdal Woman. Before we begin, let me say this. This is a story about a real person, a woman who lived and breathed and walked through the same world we walk through. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember, to sit with the weight of the unknown, to honor those who were never claimed. Tonight's episode is designed for sleep. The screen will remain dark. The rain you hear is continuous and gentle. Lower your volume until my voice is just above a whisper, just enough to follow, not enough to keep you awake. Get comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and let's begin. Isdalen, the Ice Valley. To the people of Bergen, it was also known by another name, Dødsdalen, Death Valley. In medieval times, people came here to end their lives. In the 1960s, hikers fell to their deaths in the fog that rolled in without warning. It was not a place people went by accident. It was not a place people went at all, unless they had a reason. On the morning of November 29, 1970, a man was hiking there with his 2 young daughters. The ground was cold, frost clung to the rocks, and then one of the girls saw something that didn't belong. A body, sprawled across the scree, burned so badly the police who arrived could not tell what she had looked like. Karl Halvor Aas was one of the first officers on the scene. Years later, he would still remember the smell. A strong smell of burnt flesh, he said. The body was burned all over the front, but not the back. The fire had been selective, intentional. The positioning of the objects around her was what stayed with Tormod Bonus, the forensic investigator. Her watch was not on her wrist. Her jewelry was not on her body. These things had been removed and placed beside her with a strange deliberateness. It looked like there had been some kind of ceremony, he would later say. There were rubber boots, partially melted, nylon stockings, the remains of a wool jumper, an umbrella, a plastic passport holder, 2 water bottles, an empty bottle of St. Halvard liqueur, and beneath her body, a fur hat with traces of petrol. Someone had poured petrol and set her on fire. Someone had stayed long enough to arrange objects around her. And someone had taken the time to remove every single label, every identifying mark from everything she owned. The police had no name, no documents, no witnesses who had seen anything unusual. They issued a description, approximately 164 centimeters tall, that's about 5'4", long brownish black hair, small round face, brown eyes, small ears. At the time of her death, her hair had been pulled back in a ponytail, tied with a blue and white ribbon. She appeared to be somewhere between 25 and 40 years old. Without a name, the press began calling her Isdalskvinna, the Isdal Woman. 3 days later, the investigation found its first real lead. At the Bergen railway station, in the left luggage department, 2 suitcases had been sitting unclaimed. When police opened them, they found a partial fingerprint on a pair of non-prescription glasses, a fingerprint that matched the dead woman. Inside the suitcases was a life laid bare. Clothes, several wigs, different colors, different styles, German and Norwegian currency, Belgian, British, and Swiss coins, a comb, a hairbrush, cosmetics, some teaspoons, a tube of eczema cream, and once again every label had been removed. Every tag cut from every garment. The prescription sticker on the eczema cream, the one that would have shown the name of both the doctor and the patient, scraped off until nothing was legible. The police were baffled. They contacted department stores across Europe, Galeries Lafayette in Paris. They sent photographs of the cosmetics packaging, hoping someone might recognize a brand sold only in a specific region. No one could help. But there was one item in the suitcases that had not been stripped of its origins: a plastic bag from Oscar Rordvet's footwear store in Stavanger. Police went to Stavanger and spoke to the owner's son, Rolf Rordvet. He had been working at the shop when a woman came in to buy rubber boots. He remembered her clearly. She was well dressed, he said, elegant, dark hair. She spoke English, but with an accent. She had a calm and quiet manner, and she had taken a very long time choosing her boots, far longer than most customers, almost as if the decision mattered. He also remembered a smell, a strong smell that he thought later might have been garlic. The boots Rolf Rordvet sold matched the boots found on the body in Isdal Valley. And using his description, police traced the woman to the St. Svithin Hotel, not far from the shoe shop. She had checked in under a name that, like almost everything about this woman, was a lie. Fenella Lorch. The handwritten check-in forms became the thread that unraveled her movements. And what they revealed was astonishing. The woman had stayed in at least 9 different hotels across Norway and Europe over the course of 8 months in 1970. Each time she used a different name. Each time she gave a different address, all of them in Belgium. Each time the street names she wrote down did not exist. Each time she must have presented a different passport, a different identity, a different story. In Oslo, she was Geneviève Lancier from Louvain. In Bergen, she was Claudia Tielt from Brussels, then Claudia Nielsen from Ghent. In Stavanger, she became Alexia Zarn Merchez, claiming to be from Ljubljana, though her form still listed an address in Brussels. In Trondheim, she was Vera Jarl from Antwerp. In her final weeks in Bergen, she used the names Fenella Lorch, Miss Leenhaufer, and finally, at the Hotel Horteheimen, where she was last seen alive, Elizabeth Leenhaufer from Ostend. 8 identities, 8 fabricated lives, none of them real. Hotel staff across Norway remembered her. She was a woman who left an impression. Alvhild Ragnes was a 21-year-old waitress at the Hotel Neptune in Bergen. She told the BBC decades later about seeing the Isdal Woman in the dining hall. "My first impression of her was one of elegance and self-assuredness," she said. "She looked so fashionable. I remember her winking at me." The woman sat near 2 German Navy personnel, one of them an officer, but she did not speak to them. Alvhild thought perhaps the woman noticed she was being watched a bit too closely. Other staff noticed more unsettling details. The woman often requested to change rooms, sometimes multiple times. At one hotel, she asked to change rooms 3 times. She kept to herself. She seemed alert, watchful, on guard. And then there was the language question. She spoke English fluently, with some kind of accent no one could quite place. But she also used German phrases. And one witness reported hearing her speak in what sounded like Flemish. She told people she was a traveling saleswoman, an antiquities dealer, the kind of profession that justified moving between cities, carrying luggage, asking few questions, answering fewer. But no one believed it. This was 1970. The Cold War was at its height. Norway shared a border with the Soviet Union. Spies were real. They moved through cities and hotels just like this woman did. And Bergen, for all its quiet charm, was not far from military installations that were testing new weapons, including the Norwegian-developed Penguin missile. Norwegian intelligence services were interested in the case. They would not admit it publicly for decades, but according to later investigations, security services had received reports that the Isdal Woman had been seen observing military tests in western Norway. Their reports, when they were finally declassified, reached no firm conclusion, but the rumors never stopped. Spy, double agent, woman with secrets worth killing for. Inside one of the suitcases, police had found a small notepad. At first glance, it appeared to contain nothing but gibberish, strings of letters and numbers with no obvious meaning. For months it sat in the evidence file, untranslated. Then someone looked closer. The code was simple once you understood it. The letter O stood for October, N for November. The numbers were dates. The letters after the dates were locations. 022028P, October 22nd to 28th, Paris. 029PS, October 29th, Paris to Stavanger. 029S, October 29th, Stavanger. 030BN5, October 30th to November 5th, Bergen. And on it went. The entire notepad was a log of her travels. Paris to Norway, across cities, through hotels, a record of a life spent in constant motion, crossing borders, changing names, never staying anywhere long. But why write it down at all? Why keep a coded travel diary when the whole purpose of your existence seemed to be leaving no trace? Perhaps she needed to remember. 8 identities is a lot to keep track of. Dates blur, names blur, stories blur. Maybe the notepad was her anchor, the one thing that connected all the fragments of herself. Or perhaps she wanted to be found. Perhaps she knew that someday someone would need to trace her footsteps back to wherever she had come from. And this coded note, meaningless to anyone who didn't know the key, would be the breadcrumb trail that led them there. We will never know which it was. The medical examination painted a grim picture of her final moments. There were smoke particles in her lungs. She had been alive while she burned. She had breathed in the smoke from her own burning body. The concentration of carbon monoxide in her blood was lethally high. In her stomach, investigators found between 50 and 70 sleeping pills, a brand called Phenomal, manufactured outside Norway. The pills had not been fully absorbed into her bloodstream. She had taken them shortly before she died, or perhaps someone had made her take them. There was a bruise on the right side of her neck. The forensic report noted it could have been the result of a blow, or it could have been from a fall. The medical examiner could not say for certain. She had never been pregnant. She had never given birth. Her dental work was extraordinary. 14 of her teeth had fillings. Several had gold crowns. This was unusual for a woman her age. Extensive, expensive dental work that was not typical of Norwegian dentistry. Experts would later determine the work showed characteristics of dental practices from Southern or Central Europe, possibly South America, possibly East Asia. The dental work became one of the few concrete clues to her origins. The official conclusion was probable suicide. A woman had ingested a massive quantity of sleeping pills, poured petrol over herself, and set herself on fire in a remote valley known for suicides. Case closed. But many of the investigators who had worked the case could not accept this. Carl Halvor Aas, one of the first officers on the scene, said years later, "I do not believe it was suicide. The location is too remote. The method, setting yourself on fire, it is extremely unusual. And the objects placed around the body, it felt like something else." Tormod Bonus, the forensic investigator, agreed. The arrangement of the objects around the body, the removed labels, the multiple identities, none of it fit the profile of a woman who simply wanted to end her life in solitude. And the sleeping pills, 50 to 70 of them. That is not a cry for help. That is a lethal dose taken with what appeared to be a deliberate backup plan: fire. It was, as one investigator put it, overkill. Whoever did this, whether it was the woman herself or someone else, wanted to make absolutely certain she did not survive. For more than 50 years, the Isdal Woman has resisted every attempt to name her, and in that void, theories have multiplied. The spy theory is the most persistent. It fits the facts in many ways: the multiple passports, the constant movement, the observation of military tests, the Cold War context. Norway was known to harbor both Russian and Israeli intelligence operations in those years. In 1973, just 3 years after the Isdal Woman's death, Mossad agents killed a man in Lillehammer. a case that revealed how deeply intelligence networks had penetrated Norwegian society. If she was a spy, her death makes a certain dark sense. Spies who know too much become liabilities. Spies who make mistakes are eliminated. And a body burned beyond recognition in a remote valley, with every identifying detail removed. That is a professional's disposal. The murder theory has gained traction in recent years. The bruise on her neck. The remote location she could not have reached without assistance unless she walked miles through rough terrain in the dark. The taxi driver who, in 1991, came forward anonymously to say that he had picked up the woman from her hotel, and that a man had joined them for the ride to the train station. That man was never identified. The taxi driver himself was never found again. Author Dennis Zacher Ask has argued that the Isdal Woman was a sex worker whose death was either murder or assisted suicide. He points to the pattern of her travel, always returning to the same points, marking hotel doors in different ways, as consistent with that profession. And he notes that the different men she was seen with never came forward, perhaps because they had reasons of their own to remain hidden. The suicide theory remains the official conclusion. She was a troubled woman, deeply alone, who methodically removed her identity from the world before ending her life in a place where she knew she would be found, but never named. The sleeping pills were her primary method. The fire was something else, a final act, a purification, or simply a way to ensure no one could ever see her face. But here is what makes the case so haunting. No one ever claimed her. For more than half a century, no family member, no friend, no lover, no colleague has ever come forward to say, "That woman was someone I knew. She was my daughter, my sister, my friend." She lived in the world. She moved through cities. She spoke to hotel clerks and waitresses and shoe salesmen. She existed. And yet she left no one behind who would mourn her. Or perhaps someone did mourn her, and that someone knew that coming forward would expose secrets that had to stay buried. The case never fully went cold. In 2016, Norwegian police and NRK journalists reopened the investigation. New forensic techniques had become available. Isotope analysis of her teeth, preserved because a dentistry professor had kept her jawbone in a jar after the autopsy, revealed something remarkable. The isotopes in her teeth told the story of where she had lived as a child. The water you drink as your teeth form leaves a chemical signature that can be traced to specific regions, and the Isdal Woman's teeth pointed to Nuremberg in southern Germany. She had been born around 1930, give or take 4 years. She had then moved, probably as a young child, to France, or perhaps the border region between France and Germany. Her handwriting, analyzed separately, suggested she had been educated in France or a neighboring country. She was German, or German-French, born just as the world was sliding toward the Second World War. A child of conflict, a woman who grew up in a shattered Europe. By the time she was 40, she was moving through Norway with 8 fake passports and a coded travel diary, carrying secrets that would outlive her. In 2019, the DNA Doe project took on her case. Genetic genealogists extracted DNA from tissue samples preserved during the autopsy. They determined that her mitochondrial haplogroup was H24, indicating a matrilineal line originating in Southeast Europe or Southwest Asia. But the most tantalizing lead came from France. A resident of Forbach, a town near the German border, claimed to have had a relationship with the Isdal Woman in the summer of 1970, just months before her death. He described her as a polyglot who spoke with a Balkan accent. She dressed to look younger than her age. She never shared personal details. She received scheduled phone calls from abroad. He had found wigs in her belongings and a photograph of her riding a horse. He suspected she was a spy, but was afraid to report her. The photograph has never been made public. Her name remains unknown. On February 5, 1971, the Isdal Woman was buried in an unmarked grave at Millendal Cemetery in Bergen. The funeral was Catholic, chosen because she had used saints' names on some of her hotel forms. 16 members of the Bergen police force attended. They were, in a sense, the only mourners she had. The people who had tried and failed to identify her. The people who had investigated her death and could not solve it. She was buried in a zinc coffin, specially constructed so that it would not decompose. The police kept an album of photographs from the funeral. They preserved her jawbone. They saved tissue samples. They did everything they could to ensure that if someone ever came forward, if a relative, a child, a sister, ever asked what happened to the woman with no name, there would be something left to give them. More than 50 years later, no one has come. The Isdal Woman remains what she was on the morning of November 29, 1970. A mystery. A woman who existed and then did not. A woman who burned alone in a frozen valley, surrounded by objects stripped of their meaning, in a country that was not her own. Some cases resist closure. Some stories end without resolution. In our need for answers, for justice, for endings that make sense of the chaos, we sometimes forget that the world is full of loose threads. People who vanish, names that are lost, lives that leave ripples but no wake. The Isdal Woman is one of those ripples. We don't know who killed her, if anyone did. We don't know why she was there, in Death Valley, on that cold November morning. We don't know what she was running from, or toward. We don't know if she was a spy, a victim, a woman in over her head, or someone who simply could not bear another day. All we know is that she existed, that she walked through hotels and train stations and shoe shops, that she looked at herself in mirrors in 9 different rooms under 8 different names, that she ate meals alone, that she changed her wigs and her clothes and her identity like armor, and that somewhere, perhaps in Nuremberg, perhaps in France, perhaps in a town no one has thought to check, there is a record of a girl being born, a girl who would grow up to become the most famous, unidentified woman in Norwegian history. We are still looking for her name. This has been Dusk Cases. If you are still awake, I hope this story stays with you the way it stays with me. Not as a horror, but as a reminder. Some mysteries are meant to be carried, not solved. Some stories find their weight not in their endings, but in the silence that follows. Sleep well. New cases every week.